Okay, so now we are going to start by the governance panel, Empowering Cosmos Ecosystem Growth with Governance. Zach will be here to moderate, and Josh, Fabian, and Robo will is here to share some insights about the governance. Please give them a warm round of applause.
Hey everyone, I'm Zach, product lead at Commonwealth. We're like a governance platform in the for Cosmos as well as other crypto ecosystems. I just want to begin by having us introduce ourselves and kind of the projects you're working on and who you're associated with and kind of like what role your project and yourselves play in larger governance in Cosmos. If you want to begin, Robo.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Robo, and I'm on the review committee for the Osmosis grants program. And you said stuff we're working on too?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And we're responsible for funding grants for developers building on Osmosis or improving the general Cosmos experience.
Hello. Yep. I'm Fabian. I'm the co-founder of Keplr Network. We're building a decentralized data lake using also the Cosmos SDK. And yeah, as a newly launched chain in March, I think governance is kind of like key for us right now to lay a good path there for the community to participate as much as possible in kind of like the future development of the product that we built.
Cool. Hi everyone. I'm Josh. I wear many hats, but one hat I wear is co-founder at Keplr, so building a lot of that user interface for on-chain interactions, and then also co-founder at Osmosis, where I focus a lot more on the kind of end-user side of the product, UX, and things like that.
Awesome. We'll start with Kai with a couple more questions here. What approaches to facilitating governments will you be facilitating or implementing? What role will it play in like the larger growth of Kive?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we started out with Kive, and especially we weren't actually a Cosmos chain before. We were fully built on Arweave, and then over the last couple of years we transitioned into the Cosmos space. So on the Arweave side of things, like governance is just not a thing. And so it was very cool kind of for us, like in the Cosmos ecosystem, like actually being able to give our community kind of like the voice and allow them to participate so actively in there. And of course, I think the first thing we started out was like, well, network upgrades, right? Well, they have to go through governance. So of course, like, oh, how do we communicate it correctly? How do we work with the community on that? And now we have actually a proposal or discussion live right now about our like governance process, so kind of like being very interactive with them and like, oh, like how actually should it look like if you want to propose something that should make it on chain, or if you have ideas, and how can we kind of like create the place for people to communicate. I also think the communication part is our biggest question mark actually there right now, which is like, well, you have so many people talking on so many channels, but in the end, how do you all kind of like combine them? For us, it's Commonwealth. So how do we all kind of like all get them there and kickstart the discussion there? And that's, I think, what we are most interested and also most curious about now, and like, pushing that forward.
Robo, I know you're quite interested in solving for governance fatigue. What developments in governance are you most excited to like bring to Osmosis in the near future?
Yeah, so right now Osmosis Grants is really interested moving forward in funding larger changes to the governance module itself, which hasn't been worked on in quite some time. A couple examples are things like multiple choice voting, which I'm sure Josh remembers Osmosis's canonical bridge vote and how much of a mess that was without the ability to have multiple choice voting. Things like batch governance proposals, having single proposals with multiple components that you could vote on independently. That'll be helpful in ensuring that people don't have to do separate proposals for each component. And I think just generally like pushing forward this idea of like governors, chain governors, separating the governance layer of validators from the consensus component.
Cool, I'd like to dig into that in a little bit. And to you, Josh, I know Keplr has been facilitating a lot of governance, very directly, creating dashboards, creating, views for pretty much all of the Cosmos chains. What else is Keplr like working towards to positively impact governance in Cosmos?
Yeah, I think in my opinion, governance is sort of the catalyst for a lot of social networking. So it's like, for social networks to be fun, you need things that people talk about, and I just feel like for Cosmos, it's just a very natural fit because there's already a lot of discussions happening, and typically those topics, when it's not two people fighting against each other, it's typically around governance. So I think it's a very good catalyst, and at the same time, you know, from our perspective as being the interface where a lot of people go to vote, bringing visibility, I think visibility about not necessarily the proposal itself, but the discussions around and the nuances that people have around the proposal happening in a, you know, at a closer proximity to where you vote, I think should theoretically help in resolving a lot of voter apathy and things like that. Yeah.
So now going to some larger kind of governance trends, you brought up, you know, governators or the governor system. I know there's been like a lot of mind share in the entire crypto ecosystem, but particularly Cosmos around kind of the separating of voting power and validation power and staking power and all the different, you know, ways in which, you know, all these powers kind of intersect. Do you want to kind of talk about some of the trade-offs of the system and like why you're excited about it possibly being implemented in the near future?
Yeah, sure. So first off, petition to change the name from governators to something else.
Why not?
I can't do governators. But yeah, I think that this is a really cool concept and something that we're going to start talking about a lot more coming up. But there are some, I feel like some significant issues that need to be worked out first, specifically around incentivization. How do you convince, or how do you get governators to be interested in participating in governance? You don't want to end up with, you know, completely separating governance from consensus and then having the same exact apathy issue with governors, right? And I think there's something like on average 3 to 4 proposals that come out on Osmosis every week. So this, I think, will be a pretty big issue. And then another, like, I guess, thing to think about is how do you get delegators to independently delegate to a separate set of governators or governors? Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, that's...
And Josh, do you have some thoughts on the governators?
I do. I have a lot of opinions on governators. First of all, I think the name is great because it rhymes with the word validator. So it's like, choose your validator, choose your governor. But on a more serious note, I don't think that not all validators are equipped to handle the amount of discourse that good governance process requires. And you know, I've talked to a lot more like enterprise-focused like validators who are like, oh, it's a legal risk for us to vote on proposals at this point. So I think that's fine, right? So separating these two, I think, is explicit because right now everyone is like, oh, you know, if you ask Notional, they would say it's like, yeah, of course it's the job of the validator to vote on governance proposal. But if you go on Binance after the Steam like hard fork, after Justin Sun bought out the platform, it's their official stance that they will never vote on contentious governance proposals. So I think, first of all, I do think that we need smaller units of social consensus because, you know, why have we traditionally asked validators to vote on governance proposals such as software upgrades? It's because, you know, if they don't agree on the next software upgrade, it's essentially a fork, right? So you get two different, you know, canonical versions of the thing, which I think we should normalize more. I think like forking off differences is actually a good thing, and rather than trying to get a bunch of people who disagree to fight at this very large platform, let's just make smaller units of agreement. But ultimately, I think other than these like very, you know, contentious like hard forkable proposals, I think there's a huge set of, you know, influencers or thought leaders, I don't know what the right term would be, who want to participate in governance, and the only way that they can do that on an on-chain position is running a validator, and some of them are not equipped to do that, and what ends up happening is they get slashed, and who gets the, shit under the stick is whoever that like loves this person and loves their thoughts, but because they're great governance facilitators but not great block producers, it's sort of the users that get hurt because of that. But while everyone was sort of having good intentions, so it's just kind of a sad situation all around.
So this last quarter, we saw Atom 2.0. I guess it wasn't this last quarter. It was this, about 6 months ago now. But Atom 2.0 was the subject of both great criticism and acclaim on both sides. While it didn't pass in the present state, what did the ecosystem learn? What did the different app chains learn? What did the different how did we take over from this big learning experience that was the Atom 2.0 proposal?
I think one of the biggest things is be careful about what you overhype is a big one. I think that what stakeholders were expecting out of Atom 2.0 was not what was ultimately delivered. And so I think that when you're coming out with large new revamps or feature releases, things like this, involve the community more in discussions rather than revealing it as though it's something that's already a done deal. Governance participants want to feel that they're being heard, and Osmo 2.0 was, I think, a really good example of this. This was discussed about in various different circles. It was circulated to the broader communities. It was heavily just talked about beforehand, and that's why it received so much of a better reception, in my opinion.
Yeah, sorry. I think I can just absolutely agree with this, right? We see that, and this also actually ties in, I think, to your answer from before. It's we need kind of if we do governance right, then we need kind of either everyone to be able to work in the governance and be able to be part of the process, but then of course it's also tricky because you have so many different stakeholders in the governance process, so many different experts on different things, that actually finding consensus on something is very tricky, and then bringing it on chain and then basically doing it might be a little easier approach because you already got the shareholders and stakeholders, so to say, on board in the process. And I think with the proposal there, you could just see this was here's my idea, I'm going to propose it, and then people were oh no, this is not what we kind of wanted to see. And then you see, well, actually it's very important if we have governance, and every chain has a governance, that you find a way to get the community engaged and kind of get them working on this stuff together. But I'm also absolutely on the side that we are still right now sometimes almost lacking a little bit of the infrastructure to actually do it. I think you said the multi-choice proposal, right? It's something that we see a lot with parameter updates. We want to update these sets of parameters on Kive, but actually people agree to this and this parameter, but disagree with this parameter. And I'm we need to update them all at once, and voting takes a week, and then you change this, and it takes another week and stuff. So I think this is kind of some actual tooling that is still missing to make the people more engageable on these things. Because if we already have agreement on this part of a proposal, then let's just have it pass, right? Yeah.
So liquid staking. I've heard quite a few people talk about it around, and how it's going to change governance, how it's going to change the schemes for validators and in general security in the Cosmos ecosystem. How is it going to impact governance? Is the governor the solution for some of these problems?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I know that I believe Quicksilver right now has the ability to allow you to vote with your liquid staked Atom on behalf of your validator. I think Stride is working on similar functionality. I think that can be messy. So Governator might be one way to sort of abstract that away. But also at the same time, you might actually find more or less participation this way, because if somebody wants to hold, you can envision a situation in which LSTs are saturating the market, and people would prefer to hold LSTs because they can use them in DeFi. But if they then have to vote, if they can't vote with them, right, that becomes an issue in and of itself. So I think that's something that, like, hopefully the LST providers will be able to think through and change if this voting process changes.
I have very strong feelings about LST. Just for context, it was something I was very interested, like, from back in 2019 when a failed company sort of, working on the LST, and we thought about this internally a lot, but in some ways the messiness and inconvenience of the current governance process I do think is one of the reasons why there is a high level of governance participation and actual, like, discourse around general, like, change directions and, like, stakeholders' opinions and things like that. Because I think running a crypto ecosystem is a careful balance of, there's a lot of people who are purely here for kind of financial reasons, and I don't think that's a bad thing, because you do need a group like that to kind of provide value to the services that's being built. But typically on the governance side, it tends to favor heavily on the more kind of idealistic roadmap and vision side of things. And I think it's a very careful balance. And traditionally, I think having non-direct coin, not a coin holder direct governance, and having validators in the middle allowed a lot of these discussions to take place amongst the validators who tend to be more in tune. I think what LST does is remove the power that traditionally validators and hopefully governators have into the power of, like, liquid staking token holders or that platform itself, which is going to be very primarily be used by people who are staking not because they want to secure a chain or participate in governance. It's just, hey, it's basically free, yield without, like, it's the risk-free rate, and you'd be dumb to miss out on that. And what you get in return is you get a massive kind of governance power which skews towards this direction, where previously I think it sort of existed in a very nice equilibrium. So, yeah, I think if that doesn't get solved, and Sunny said it's like liquid staking has basically turned proof of stake into a proof of authority chain, right? And I do think that's very valid, and I think that's concerning, not just because of, like, block production, but more so on governance and kind of the balances of powers between these two very distinct sets of user profiles.
So I know Fabian is dealing with a lot of decisions on how to, like, build Kive out. How are you managing some of these drawbacks and trade-offs in, like, the design of your system?
That's a good question. I think, first of all, for us as a young project, right, this is, first of all, very important to kind of also figure out, like, which processes actually need to go through governance and which they actually don't need to go through governance, where we assumed first that they would need to go through governance. One example is you can create a data pool on Kive, and we first thought, maybe it's good if it goes through governance, because then they have a say on, like, which data they want to see on Kive. And then actually we now pivoted and we're like, well, actually we kind of want everyone, like, more permissionless, to just create, like, a data pool, and then there might be other ways to curate it or things like this. And then I think this changes over time for us as a young project, like figuring out which process you can kind of, like, well, democratize in which way, and also, like, how it's kind of, like, best to handle them. There's still a lot of learning by doing, also, like, managing it with the community, especially seeing, like, where are they specifically interested in. And we definitely, I mean, as a data project, we even have, like, we have the very financial motivated people, you have the very data driven tech motivated people, and kind of, like, aligning those on, like, their level of expertise and stuff is very interesting. And so, yeah, I think for us, kind of, like, building out the governance process is the first critical part, and then sticking this and improving it along the way is, I think, for us the right way and only way forward for now, to get, like, a base governance framework in place. And then from there on, of course, we can then always optimize into certain other directions once that is done.
So in crypto, one of the things that I've loved most is meeting people like you who all have very particular interests and nerd out about random little things that are developments in the ecosystem. I kind of want to just open the floor to whatever you've been, like, most nerding out about over the last 6 months in the Cosmos ecosystem, and just get other this whole room and everyone online kind of excited about what's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, I'll start. So for governance in particular, I think that when we have these, I start to think about cross-chain governance like a lot. I think maybe the biggest example of this is Uniswap's deployments on other chains, using various bridges, Wormhole, and a few others. But with outposts being launched by, for example, like Mars Protocol or even Osmosis, and you have sort of like basically governance processes of one chain executing a change to a contract on another chain, I think that this can lead to some potentially like really interesting frictions and use cases for governance. So I think like cross-chain governance in Cosmos is very, very new and very young, and it's kind of hard to see which direction this is going to go. But given IBC is what it is, I think this is going to be one of the most interesting places to see cross-chain governance use cases flourishing.
I think for me it is, particularly on the governance side of things, it's actually kind of like realizing also, and it sounds a little weird I think, but almost the importance of politics and the dynamics we see happening also now reflecting like things on chain, right? I mean, it's not basically, it is the same kind of processes, and also like learning this. And it's a funny story, one of our developers, his dad is the mayor of our town. So we have always a lot of like political gossip going on in the office. And then you like realize, oh, actually, it's not far off from what we are doing, right? It's just like at a different level, and we are so used to it. And I think kind of like the importance of politics in the crypto ecosystem, I think what I've been, specifically for governance, been thinking about most. But of course, more of like me being on the data heavy side, actually what I'm learning about out is really kind of like the difference between like accessing data and writing data to a blockchain, right? Where like with writing, you're 100% sure it's correct, it's on the chain, and it's not going to change. But then actually when you first realize, oh, when I read data from the blockchain, it's not coming from the blockchain directly, right? It's like, it's a copy that's been made from the server I'm requesting, and actually these servers, sometimes they do unfortunately do mistakes, and you actually get incorrect RPC calls and things like that. And then sometimes also realizing, well, we have all like the governance stuff to figure out, but also we have a little bit of tech debt kind of like there to do almost, and there's like one person or one project where it's like, this is a problem. I think it's just in general, like the way how we are dealing with this. And I'm actually surprised by like how fragile it still is, and how kind of like we can improve this to make sure that we're getting like the perfect experience from like a tech perspective, knowing like, oh, everything we do there, that is secure and that is in place. And then with the governance as well, kind of like, well, then how can we have everyone have a say in that, and like twisting it from like, well, permissionless and kind of like a democratic purpose to like improving then the protocol going forward.
Yeah, I think for me, I think it's somewhat similar to what Robo was mentioning, but more in the context of like assuming app chains keep kind of growing at the rate that it has right now, which hopefully everything gets easier, more people will build, so that would be exponential. I think there's this kind of like, but I think the rate that validators, governators, or essentially people who are kind of key decision makers on governance find reputation and a following grows at a very linear rate. So in the world where, let's say, hey, there's 1,000 blockchains, but there's only about 100, validators who vote on proposals that people know, I think it'd be very interesting to see kind of delegators follow validators, and validators kind of creating a very thesis-driven, validator faction almost, right, for their delegators, where they're a lot more picky on which chains they validate, but at the same time, it's a very thesis-driven group of delegators. It's a thesis-driven team within the validators themselves. And we're already seeing this, where before a validator typically only consisted of a bunch of DevOps people, but now we actually see more people adding protocol specialists who are dealing with a lot of these things as validators grow. And I think validators as almost this like, various kind of like political faction in the multi-chain ecosystem, and being the kind of like social layer to connect other blockchains that have similar values, I think is going to be very fascinating. Yeah.
I think we're over time, but I want to make sure we share some Cosmos hot takes first before we leave the stage. Robo, you want to kick us off?
Sure, yeah. Sorry for this one, Josh, but hot take is I think that most vote power centralization problems can be solved at the front end level and don't need to be fixed on the back end level. Like if wallets like Keplr or Cosmos Station were to, for example, randomize the validator set, a lot of people just hop in and they delegate to whoever's first, right? So I think this is probably like the lowest lift, easiest thing that could be done to decentralize a chain's validator set right now.
Is this supposed to be a hot take?
Yeah. Hot takes.
Oh, you go. Oh, I'll let you. Okay. I think my, let me think. No, so I think my, yeah, I think I kind of already said like my hot take on like the whole Cosmos governance is really kind of like the importance of the political factor of it, right? And also the importance of the validators validating on your chain, because ultimately they do have a lot of control first on like a block production level. I mean, if they stop, they stop, right? This doesn't matter. And then of course also on the governance level, because the people that ultimately have the 1 or 0 control of either I'm running or I'm not running, also now have kind of like the soft control of like, oh, I can steer where things should go. And I think, I mean, we all know, I mean, there are very like controversial validators, very conservative validators in the space, and I think it's very interesting how this will affect like a really permissionless network going forward. And I think it's kind of something that is also underestimated right now, and like the actual impact of this. Because in the end, what the validators can also do is they can also just always shift any kind of update without going through governance. I mean, it's a common practice when a security problem, right? Well, you just shift the new code hidden, they all execute it, and your chain keeps running with the security fix and no one knows about it. And it's actually the same thing that can happen with any kind of parameter change or anything, with completely going beyond governance. And it's kind of like interesting how this will, I think, play out in the next couple of years.
For me, I think I'm just going to go follow up on Robo, where I think you should check out our talk at Nebular, because I think we are going to try to solve that. That being said, I guess related to that, I also have a hot take where I believe Nakamoto coefficient and like decentralizing voting power for the sake of decentralizing voting power is absolute. I'll spare the words there, but I think there should be a level of meritocracy in voting power. Someone who is actually contributing more and adding more value I think it's okay for them to have 10 times more voting power than someone who is not at the rank 120. Obviously, that should skew, and I do agree. I think we should have interfaces that highlight these, because this does get lost a lot. But things like, hey, decentralize voting power and vote to someone who is at number 70 because we have a very bad Nakamoto coefficient, feels like a very poor way of underestimating a lot of the work that kind of some top validators have put in to add value as well. So I guess that's my hot take.
Thank you, Robo, Fabian, and Josh. Thank you, everyone.